The truck was heard before it was seen. Harriet Boone stood at the iron gate at the end of Miller Road and listened to the diesel engine working its way up the county road. She had been tightening a hinge bolt when the sound reached her. She set the wrench down on the top rail. She did not move. The flatbed transporter came around the bend slowly, the way heavy vehicles move when the driver is uncertain of the road. Sunlight caught the paint on the two trucks riding the bed. Brand new red, the kind of red that had never seen dust. Harriet walked to the gate latch, lifted it, and pulled the gate shut. She stood in front of it with her hands in the front pockets of her flannel shirt. The transporter rolled to a stop 10 feet away. The young driver leaned out the window and looked at her, the way people look at something they did not expect to find in the road. She did not explain herself. The engine idled. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the wheat field to the left. Harriet did not look away from the driver. The driver did not get out. That was where everything began. Not with the argument that came after. Not with the boy running across the yard, with his face already reading the situation wrong. It began with a woman standing in a gateway on a Tuesday morning in October of 1984, not saying a word, not moving an inch, holding a line that 3 generations had walked before her. To understand what she was protecting you had to go back further than that morning. Silas Boone arrived in Crestfall County, Nebraska, before roads had names. He came with a wagon, a pair of draft horses, and the kind of quiet that men carry when they have already decided who they are. The land he filed on was rough, all of it. Rock in the south corners, a creek bed that flooded twice a year in the north, and soil that needed years of work before it gave anything back. His neighbors borrowed to buy, seed borrowed, to buy equipment, borrowed to expand when good years came. Silas watched them. He was not judgmental about it. He simply did not do the same. He repaired what he owned. He bought only what he could carry in his hand and pay for on the spot. When men asked him why he refused the bank's terms, he said the same thing every time. A man who owes nothing owns everything. Most of them laughed at that. Some of them stopped laughing later. Some of them never got the chance. The land Silas broke and planted became Raymond Boone's land, and Raymond carried the same rule forward without being told to. He wrote it down once in a composition notebook he kept in the drawer of the kitchen table, not as a philosophy, but as an operating principle. The farm produces. The farm pays its own way. The farm does not borrow against tomorrow to survive today. Raymond paid off the last of what Silas had owed on the original land, in full, and he kept the receipt. He kept the receipt because Raymond Boone was the kind of man who understood that paper outlasted memory. He kept it in a tin box beneath the front seat of the old Chevrolet, along with every other document that mattered, because he believed a truck cab was more fireproof than sentiment. Harriet had learned all of this, not from Raymond telling her, but from watching him. She had not grown up farming. She had grown up in a small house in a small town 40 miles east where her father worked at a grain elevator, and her mother kept careful ledgers for the household accounts. When she married Raymond Boone at 29, she came to the land as a student. Raymond was a patient teacher. He taught her to read the sky before sunrise. He taught her which corner of the field held water after rain and which one gave it up too fast. He taught her to write down every expenditure in the same ledger her mother would have recognized, not because he distrusted his own memory, but because he knew he would not always be there to remember. He was right about that. In 1978, Raymond Boone was killed by a piece of equipment that failed the way farm equipment sometimes fails without warning, without giving a man time to step back. He was 48 years old, Harriet was 52, Owen was 13. The county sent someone to the farm within the week. A man from an agricultural lending office in Lincoln, who sat at the kitchen table with a folder of papers and explained to Harriet that there were programs available, financing options, bridge loans designed specifically for operations transitioning ownership after a loss. He said the word transition the way people say it, when they mean something harder than the word sounds. Harriet listened to everything he said. She offered him coffee. When he finished, she thanked him and closed the folder and handed it back and said she would not be needing it. He left the folder on the table. She put it in the trash the same afternoon. That decision cost her 3 years of difficulty she did not talk about to anyone except herself. There were harvests where she fell behind. There were repairs she stretched across 2 seasons because she could only afford one at a time. There were mornings when the numbers in the ledger did not add up the way she needed them to, and she sat at the kitchen table in the dark before sunrise going over them again, with a pencil, not in despair but in the way a woman goes over a problem she intends to solve. She solved them, every one. By the time Owen was old enough to understand what the farm was and what it meant, Harriet had rebuilt what the loss of Raymond had disrupted, and she had done it without signing a single document that put the land at risk. Owen did not know what that had cost. He knew only the result, which was a farm that ran a mother who ran it, and a truck that had been old for as long as he could remember. The Chevrolet C10 sat in the yard like an argument nobody wanted to finish. It was a 1959 model, and it looked every year of its age. The paint was gone in most places, replaced by a reddish brown that was not rust exactly, but was not paint either. The driver's seat had been repaired twice with strips of canvas from a feed sack, and the canvas had frayed at the edges and been repaired again. The dashboard had a crack that ran from the defroster vent down to the radio, and the radio had not worked since 1971. Owen had driven it since he was 15. He knew every sound it made. He knew the hesitation in third gear on cold mornings and the shimmy in the front end on gravel above 40 miles an hour, and the way the temperature gauge climbed in slow traffic and needed watching. He knew all of this, and he hated all of it, with the focused and particular hatred of a young man who has spent his life being embarrassed by something he could not change. At the diner in town on Saturday mornings, Owen listened to the other farmers talk. Not the old ones who remembered dry years and bank closures, the younger ones, the ones who had bought new equipment on financing and were expanding their operations and talking about yields and efficiency in the language of men who believed the future was arriving right on schedule. Dale Mercer, who farmed the 260 acres adjacent to the Boone property on the north side, was the loudest of them. Dale was 55 and had the confidence of a man who had never been seriously wrong about anything yet. He had financed a second tractor 3 years earlier and expanded into 200 additional acres on a loan that his bank called a growth instrument. He drank his coffee like a man who owned the mug. He spoke to Owen the way an uncle speaks to a nephew he considers promising, but not yet formed. "You want to grow this place," Dale told him one morning in early September. "You need to stop thinking the way your mother thinks. Nothing against Harriet. Your mother is a capable woman, but she farms like it is still the Depression, and it is not the Depression anymore." Owen listened. He did not disagree out loud, but he listened. That evening, Owen spread the Anderson Farm equipment catalog across the kitchen table while Harriet was finishing the dishes. He had folded the corner of the page he wanted. 2 trucks, a Ford F700 grain truck in red and a matching hauler. The specifications were printed in a font that made them look like facts. Payload capacity, engine displacement, turning radius. All of it pointing toward the same conclusion Owen had already reached. Harriet dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at the page. "The payments are listed down here," Owen said. 84 months. He pointed to the number. It is manageable. Harriet set the dish towel on the counter. That is the most beautiful sentence a bank has ever written, she said. It is manageable. Nobody puts what happens in month 47 when the yield drops. Owen kept his finger on the number. I have run the math. So has the bank, Harriet said. That is why they offer it. She picked up the catalog and looked at the page for a long moment. Not at the trucks, at the total. Then she set it back down and walked out of the kitchen. Owen stood at the table alone. The number he had been pointing to felt smaller than it had 10 minutes earlier. He left the catalog open because leaving it there felt like leaving an argument unfinished. The argument resumed 3 days later, and it was not finished then either. Or the week after. What Owen could not make Harriet understand, or what he could not make himself stop believing, was that the farm was falling behind. Not in a catastrophic way. Not in a way anyone could point to directly. But in the slow, cumulative way of an operation that was not moving at the speed the world around it was moving. The neighbors were buying. The yields on modern equipment were better. The time lost to breakdowns on the old Chevrolet was real time, real money, real harvest that either happened or did not happen, depending on whether the truck started. He was not wrong about the breakdowns. In the third week of September, the Chevrolet lost its fuel pump in the south field with 2 loads of corn still to move. Owen sat in the cab for 40 minutes before he got it started again on a workaround he had figured out from a repair manual he had borrowed from the county extension office. He told Harriet that evening. She nodded and wrote the repair cost in the ledger. That was the night Owen decided. The following Saturday, he drove into town to pick up a belt for the combine, which was true. He parked in front of the hardware store and went inside and bought the belt. Then he walked 3 blocks to Anderson Farm Equipment. The showroom floor was polished concrete under fluorescent lights. The equipment sat on it like it had always been there, like it belonged somewhere climate-controlled and spotless. Garrett Flynn came across the floor with his hand already out, the walk of a man who has learned to read the angle of approach. He was 35, broad-shouldered, with a salesman's habit of making eye contact and holding it 2 seconds longer than felt natural. Owen told him what he wanted. Flynn smiled in the way a man smiles when the customer has already decided, and the sale is just a matter of paperwork. 2 hours later, Owen signed 2 contracts. He used the name Boone Farm on the buyer line the way Flynn suggested because a business account carried a higher credit threshold than an individual, and because it was the name on the mailbox and it was not a lie, not exactly. The delivery was scheduled for the following Thursday. He drove home with the belt in the passenger seat and the carbon copy of the contract folded in his shirt pocket. He did not tell Harriet. He did not know that in the parking lot of Anderson Farm Equipment after Owen's truck had turned onto the county road, Garrett Flynn stood beside the door with his phone in his hand and dialed a number in Lincoln. He told the man who answered that the Boone property on Miller Road outside Crestfall had just opened a finance account. He said it was a clean operation, no existing debt, good land, the kind of account worth paying attention to. The man on the other end of the line was named Preston Gallagher. He wrote the name Boone on a notepad and drew a small circle around it. Thursday came without drama. The sky was clear. Harriet was at the far gate repairing a hinge bolt she had been meaning to get to since August. The bolt was stripped on one side, and she had already been out twice and come back without the right size socket, so she had brought 3 different sockets this time and laid them on the top rail and was working through them methodically. She heard the engine first. Heavy diesel. The labored sound of something carrying weight. She looked toward the county road. The flatbed transporter came around the bend with both new trucks strapped to the bed, their hoods facing forward, their paint catching the October light. The red was the exact red from the catalog page that had been sitting on her kitchen table for 3 weeks. Harriet set down her socket and walked to the gate latch. She pulled the gate shut. She stood in front of it. The transporter stopped. The young driver leaned out. She watched him decide she was not going to move on her own. Owen came running from the direction of the barn, his boots loud on the gravel, his face already carrying the expression of a man who has made a decision and is watching it arrive at the wrong time. "Mom." She did not look at him yet. She kept her eyes on the trucks on the flatbed, taking a full accounting of them. Then she looked at Owen. "You signed papers." Owen stopped walking. He was breathing from the run. "I did." "Under what name?" He paused half a second too long. "Boone Farm," he said. She nodded. She reached into the pocket of her flannel shirt and took out a small, folded envelope, the kind that mailer advertisements came in. She tore it in half along the crease, then tore it again, and dropped the 4 pieces into the grass at the base of the gatepost without looking down. Owen stared at the pieces. "That was from Anderson Farm Equipment," she said. "They sent it this morning." She had known since the mail arrived. By then, neighbors were slowing on the county road. A pickup going east stopped on the gravel shoulder, and the driver got out and leaned against the hood, with his arms crossed. 2 more vehicles stopped behind it. Word moved fast in Crestfall County, and the sight of a transporter carrying brand new trucks stopped in the road outside the Boone property was the kind of thing that moved fastest of all. Dale Mercer was among them. He pulled his truck up behind the others and got out and stood with his coffee still in his hand, watching. Cassie Roth was 17 years old and worked occasional days for Harriet during harvest. She was coming back from the feed co-op with her father's truck when she saw the vehicle stopped on the shoulder and the transporter and the woman standing at the gate. She pulled over and got out and stood beside her truck with her hands in her back pockets. She was close enough to hear everything that was said. How much Harriet asked. Owen told her the monthly payment. She shook her head. "That is not what I asked." He told her the total financed. Dale Mercer whistled through his teeth from across the road. It was not admiration. It was the sound a man makes when he sees a number larger than he expected. Harriet turned to face Owen fully now. Her voice did not rise. "You are not buying 2 trucks," she said. Owen frowned. "I signed for 2. You signed for 4, she said. 2 for this farm and 2 for the bank. Because that is who you are going to be paying by the time the interest is done." Owen opened his mouth, closed it. The math had not appeared to him that way before. Harriet turned back toward the house without saying anything else. She was gone for 2 minutes. Owen stood at the gate with the transporter idling in front of him, and the driver not sure what to do, and the neighbors watching from the road. When Harriet came back, she was carrying a metal tin box that Owen had seen his whole life and never opened. She carried it to the gate and held it out. He took it. She nodded toward the latch. "Open it." He lifted the lid. Inside were papers, layers of them, carefully folded and stacked. He began pulling them out one at a time. Receipts from a machine shop in Crestfall, invoices from 2 different dealerships for parts, work orders with itemized labor costs. All of them, dated all of them marked paid in Raymond's handwriting, which Owen recognized even on the oldest ones. He kept going back. The stack went deep. Receipts from the early 1970s, from the late 1960s, from years before Owen was born. Every single service record for the Chevrolet from the year Raymond bought it. "Keep going," Harriet said. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper with a column of numbers totaled at the bottom. Every repair cost added together across 25 years of ownership. Harriet had done the addition herself in pencil at some point Owen could not date. He looked at the number. He looked at the payment amount on the contract in his shirt pocket. He did the comparison in his head and then did it again because the first result felt wrong. The total on Harriet's sheet was lower, not by a small margin, by enough that the number sat wrong in the chest. 25 years of keeping that truck running, Harriet said, cost less than the interest on your contract in the first 7 years. The driver in the transporter was looking at his watch. Owen stood at the gate with the tin box in his hands and the papers in a loose stack around it, and the October light coming level across the fields, and he did not have an answer for the numbers in front of him. "Take them back," Harriet said. The driver looked at Owen. Owen looked at the papers. "Take them back," Harriet said again to the driver this time. The driver started the transporter, moving in reverse. The 2 red trucks rolled backwards slowly, their perfect paint still catching the light, and then the transporter turned on the county road and headed back the way it had come. The neighbors dispersed without comment. Dale Mercer got in his truck and pulled onto the road and drove past the gate without looking over. Cassie Roth stood by her truck for a moment longer, watching the transporter until it was out of sight. Then she got in and drove. Owen remained at the gate. He did not move for a long time. The tin box was still in his hands. Harriet had gone back to the hinge bolt. She had found the right socket. He could hear the wrench turning from where he stood. He was embarrassed. Every person who had stopped on that road would tell someone by evening, and that someone would tell another, and by Saturday morning, at the diner, the story would be a complete thing, with an audience. He was 19 years old, and his mother had turned his trucks around in front of the county, but the numbers were still there in his hands. And the numbers did not change because he was embarrassed. That evening, he sat beside the old Chevrolet in the barn after supper. He had not spoken to Harriet since the gate. She came out and sat on an overturned feed bucket 10 feet away, and they were both quiet for a long time with the barn around them and the sound of the wheat moving outside in the evening wind. Finally, Harriet spoke. "I am not keeping that truck because I love it," she said. Owen looked at her. "I am keeping it because everything we have ever spent on it is gone, used up and done." She paused. "The moment you sign something, part of what you earn next year belongs to someone else before you earn it." Owen turned the tin box over in his hands. "Grandpa Raymond kept all of that," he said. "He kept everything," she said, because he knew that numbers are the only argument that outlasts an opinion. Owen set the box on his knee. "There was something else I should tell you," Harriet said. He looked up. She went back to the house and came back with a plain envelope from the kitchen drawer. She handed it to him. He pulled out the letter inside. It was from the county land office, and it was dated October of 1983, nearly a year past. He read it once and read it again. Meridian Land Group, survey registration, Miller Road corridor, 3 adjacent parcels under review. He looked up. "They want the land," he said. Harriet took the letter back. "They want all of it," she said. "Not just ours." She put the letter in the tin box on top of Raymond's receipts and closed the lid. Owen sat with the closed box in his hands for a long time after she went inside. The barn was dark except for the one light over the tack wall. The old truck sat in its corner the way it always sat, engine cold chrome gone to brown at every edge patient. in the way that old things are patient when they have outlasted everything that was supposed to replace them. He did not sleep well that night. And in the morning, he went back to work because that was what the farm required, and because some things you learn slowly, and the learning is not comfortable, and comfort was not what Harriet Boone had ever promised him. The cold came early that year and stayed. November moved through Crestfall County like a creditor taking the color out of everything it touched. The fields went gray. The creek that ran along the north edge of the Boone property dropped to a trickle and then froze along its edges. Owen split firewood every morning before breakfast and stacked it against the south wall of the barn and did not talk much, which was new for him. The arguments had stopped. That was not the same as things being settled. Harriet watched him the way she watched weather, not with alarm, with attention. She knew the silence was not sulking. It was the particular quiet of a young person doing arithmetic on something that cannot be solved quickly. The numbers in the tin box had done something to him that her words alone had not managed. She did not push. She had learned from Raymond that the most useful thing a person can do after planting something is leave it alone. Winter passed the way winters pass on a working farm. There was always something that needed doing, and the cold made all of it harder and slower, and the days were short. And by the time the light was gone, the body was already finished. Owen repaired fencing in the south pasture. He overhauled the hydraulic lines on the smaller tractor. He read the farming magazines he had always read, but now Harriet sometimes found them left open on the kitchen table with numbers written in the margins, his own handwriting, working through calculations she had not asked for. She did not comment on the calculations. She simply noted them. Spring arrived in pieces the way it does in Nebraska. A warm week, followed by a cold snap, followed by mud so deep it pulled boots off at the ankle. Harriet watched the sky the way her husband had taught her. The clouds in April had a particular flatness to them that she had seen before, a density at the edges that told her something. She began harvesting the winter wheat 2 weeks earlier than the county average. Her neighbors noticed and did not comment, which was its own kind of comment. By June, the comment had become unnecessary. The rain had not come. Not the May rain that softened the soil for planting, and not the early June rain that pushed the corn into its first real growth. The sky was a pale white that offered nothing. Farmers stood in their yards in the morning, looking north and looking west, and looking at each other across fence lines with the expression of men calculating losses they had not yet confirmed. At the Hattie's Diner on Saturday mornings, the conversation changed register. The talk of expansion and new equipment and growth instruments fell away. In its place came the careful, measured language of men who were beginning to suspect they had made decisions in good years that were going to present themselves differently in a bad one. Dale Mercer was quieter than usual. Owen noticed it one Saturday in late June when Dale came in and sat at the counter instead of his regular booth and drank his coffee without saying much to anyone. Owen sat 2 stools down and ate his eggs and watched Dale from the side of his vision. The older man's hands were around the mug with a grip that was too tight for the temperature of the coffee. On the drive home, Owen told Harriet what he had seen. She nodded once. She was watching the road. "How much does he owe?" Owen asked. "More than the land can cover in a bad year," she said. Owen was quiet for a mile. "Did he ever ask you?" he said. "For advice." Harriet looked at the road ahead. "People do not ask for advice," she said. "They ask for agreement. Those are different requests." The drought confirmed itself through July. The corn that had gone in late came up stunted, and the tassels emerged too early, and the ears that formed were narrow and light. Harriet walked her fields every morning before the heat built and made notes in the ledger she carried. Owen walked with her and made his own notes in a separate book. They did not always agree on what they saw, but they were both honest about writing down what was in front of them rather than what they wished was there. That discipline was the difference between a farm that could plan and a farm that could only react. The second week of July. Dale Mercer knocked on the kitchen door on a Tuesday evening. Harriet opened it. He came inside and sat at the table, and she put coffee in front of him without asking and sat across from him. Owen was on the porch and did not come in, but could hear through the screen door. Dale's face had a quality to it that Harriet recognized. She had seen it in the mirror in 1978 when the county man sat at this same table with his folder of financing options. It was the face of someone who had come to the end of a calculation and did not like the result. The bank called, Dale said. She nodded. First missed payment, he said. They gave me 60 days. She looked at the mug in his hands. What is the real number, she said. He told her. It was larger than Owen had guessed from 2 stools away at the diner. Can you sell equipment? She said. Some of it is collateral, he said. The expansion acres, the new tractor, the hauler. All of it tied up. He paused. The home ground might have enough equity if prices hold, but prices were not holding. Everyone at the diner knew it. The corn market had been soft since March, and soft corn in a drought year did not get stronger. Dale wrapped both hands around the mug. He was a man who was accustomed to having opinions about other people's choices, and he was sitting at the table of a woman whose choices he had questioned for years, and she was not pointing that out, and somehow that made it worse. I thought the good years would keep coming, he said. She did not answer that. There was no useful answer. He left an hour later. She stood at the door and watched his taillights go down Miller Road. Behind her, Owen came in from the porch. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Is there anything she can do? He said. He used the wrong pronoun and caught himself. Is there anything you can do? I can let him borrow the flatbed next week for moving hay, she said. That is what I can do. Owen looked at the table where Dale had been sitting. The mug was still there. The Chevrolet lost its transmission on a Thursday morning in late July, which was a timing so poor it had a dark comedy to it. Harriet and Owen were running the last of the wheat in from the east field, and they were behind because the combine had thrown a belt 2 days prior, and the repair had cost them a day and a half. Owen was driving the Chevrolet with a full load, and the truck simply stopped moving on the grade coming up from the lower field. The load was too heavy for what the transmission had left to give. He sat in the cab for a moment, with the engine still running and the truck going nowhere. Then he set the brake and climbed out. Harriet came around the field road on the tractor and stopped beside him. She looked at the truck. Then she looked at the load. Then she looked at the sky, which was still pale and unhelpful. We need to unload it, Owen said. She climbed down from the tractor without answering, which was her version of agreement. They spent the next hour moving grain from the truck to the tractor's small utility trailer, in the heat making 2 extra trips to the bins that the transmission failure had cost them. Owen did not say what he was thinking. He was thinking about the red trucks on the flatbed in October, their perfect paint, and their full payload ratings. He was thinking about the number of hours they had now spent nursing the Chevrolet through another season. But he was also thinking about the number at the bottom of his mother's handwritten page in the tin box. And he did not say what he was thinking. That evening, Harriet called the machine shop in Crestfall and got the estimate on a rebuilt transmission. The cost was real, but it was a specific bounded number. She opened the farm ledger, looked at the current balance, and wrote the repair figure in the margin. Then she wrote a check and set it under the telephone for the morning. Owen watched her do it. "That is money we actually have," he said. It was not a question. It was something closer to someone hearing a lesson they had been told before and finally recognizing the shape of it. Harriet capped the pen. "It is also a truck we will own again by Friday," she said. Nothing changed about what we owe when it broke. She put the ledger away and went to bed. Owen sat at the table a few minutes longer, outside the wheat field that had not had enough rain, moved in the hot, dry wind, and the sound of it came through the screen door, a low, continuous hush that was neither peaceful nor alarming, but simply present the way the land was always present, asking nothing and offering nothing beyond what the work and the season would yield. On a Wednesday morning in the first week of August, a black SUV came down Miller Road and stopped at the Boone Gate. The driver did not honk. He stepped out of the vehicle and stood on the road side of the gate and looked at the property with the careful, measuring attention of a man who is pricing something. Harriet was on the roof of the grain storage building, replacing a section of flashing that had lifted in a spring windstorm. She had seen the SUV from the road while she was still climbing the ladder. She finished the section she was working on. Then she climbed down. By the time she reached the gate, the man was still standing on the outside of it. He was 44 years old, well-built, with the particular neatness of a man who does not work outside. His suit jacket was draped over one arm despite the heat. He wore glasses with thin frames, and his shoes were leather, and had been polished that morning and were now acquiring a thin coat of road dust that he seemed aware of. He extended his hand over the top of the gate. "Mrs. Boone, Preston Gallagher, Meridian Land Group." She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She did not open the gate. He lowered his hand without changing his expression. "We have been acquiring land in this corridor for the past 18 months, he said. "We are prepared to offer $1.8 million for the full 400 acres. 30-day close." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document which he held over the gate. She did not take it. "Not interested," she said. He kept the document extended. "Mrs. Boone, this offer reflects a premium above current market. Given the drought conditions and the pressure on neighboring operations, I think you will find the timing is favorable." She had cement dust on her hands from the flashing work and a streak of it along her left forearm. She was 68 years old, and she had been on a roof since 7 in the morning, and she had been managing this land alone for 6 years, and the man her standing at her gate with polished shoes was telling her the timing was favorable. She turned and walked back toward the storage building. Gallagher stood at the gate for a moment with the document still in his hand. He looked at the property. He looked at the gate Harriet had built herself years ago, the iron rails and the chain latch. He looked at the barn and the bins and the windbreak trees along the north fence. He folded the document and put it back in his pocket. Then he took his phone out and photographed the gate. He photographed the corner post and the county road marker and the fence line running east. He did it without rushing the way a man photographs something he intends to revisit. Owen came out of the barn and saw him. He stopped in the yard and watched Gallagher finish with the phone and get back in the SUV and drive away without looking over. Owen did not tell Harriet about the photographs. He told himself it was because she was already back on the roof, and he did not want to interrupt. He would understand later that the real reason was that he was not yet sure what the photographs meant, and he needed to carry the uncertainty alone for a little while before he gave it to her. He was wrong to hold it. He would know that later, too. 3 weeks after Gallagher's visit, the auction signs appeared on the Miller Road fence posts belonging to Dale Mercer. Yellow signs with black lettering, equipment, and real property. The date was a Saturday in late August. Harriet did not say anything when she saw the signs. She drove past them on her way into town, and she drove past them again on the way home, and she did not comment either time. Owen saw her jaw set and release when she passed them, and he did not comment either. On the morning of the auction, Cassie Roth arrived at the Boone property at 6 a.m. instead of her usual 7:30. She had been working for Harriet since June, doing whatever needed doing, because Dale's financial situation had reduced the operation to the point where he could not pay her regularly, and Harriet could. Cassie was 17 and practical about it in the way that people who grow up on working farms are practical about most things. She did not make it dramatic. She showed up and worked. She had slept in the small room at the back of the house that had once been a mudroom, and that Harriet had cleared out in July when it became apparent the Mercer situation was not going to resolve quickly. She had not asked Cassie if she wanted the room. She had simply cleaned it and put a blanket on the cot and left the door open. And on the next day, Cassie arrived. He arrived with a bag. On the morning of the auction, Cassie came into the kitchen at 6 and started the coffee and did not say anything about where her father's equipment was going to end up that afternoon. Harriet let her work in silence and did not ask. They went to the auction together at noon. Owen drove. Nobody spoke on the way there. The Mercer property had the particular stillness of a place that already knows what is about to happen to it. The equipment was staged in the south field, marked with lot numbers on tags tied to the steering columns and the hitch pins and the hydraulic arms. There was more of it than Owen had realized. More than Dale had talked about owning at the diner. 2 tractors. A combine that was only 3 years old. 4 trucks. The big loader Dale had bought the previous fall on what he had called a strategic acquisition. The auctioneer's voice carried across the field, and numbers rose and fell, and pieces of Dale Mercer's operation moved from his name to other names in increments of a few seconds each. Owen stood next to Harriet and watched. He was looking for Dale and did not find him until midway through the morning, when he saw the older man standing alone on the far side of the empty barn, with his arms crossed and his back half turned to the field where his equipment was being sold. He was not watching. He was simply present, the way a person is present, when they feel they owe it to something to be there, even though being there is the hardest part. Owen left Harriet's side and walked around the edge of the crowd. He found Cassie first. She was standing near the barn wall, 20 feet from her father, close enough to be present, and far enough to give him the privacy of his silence. Owen stood beside her. He did not know what to say. He was 19 years old, and the situation was beyond the vocabulary he had for it. Cassie said it first. "My father told me last spring that he was smarter than your mother," she said. Not meanly, just as a fact he believed. Owen looked at Dale's back across the yard. "He is not a bad man," Cassie said. "He is just a man who borrowed against things that were not certain yet, and then the certain things did not come." She was watching her father with an expression that was too old for her face. "The strongest people I know never announce themselves," she said. "They just keep going and let the years do the talking." Owen did not forget that sentence. He would carry it for a long time. Near the end of the auction, he saw something that reorganized everything else he had seen that morning. A young man in a light blue dress shirt was working through the crowd with a clipboard, stopping at each lot before the bidding closed and confirming the buyer's information. He was not a local. His shoes were wrong for the ground, and his clipboard was a printed form rather than a handwritten sheet. Owen watched him move through the field. When the bidding opened on the home ground itself, the 260 acres that had been Dale Mercer's family land, the young man in the blue shirt raised his paddle twice, and the price moved and did not come back down. The auctioneer knocked it over to the clipboard. Owen moved toward the registration table at the edge of the field. He looked at the paperwork visible on the clipboard from a few feet away. The company line read, Meridian Land Group. He turned and looked across the field. To the north, the Hutchins property that had gone under in May. To the east, the Pruitt place that had sold in a private transaction in June. He had not connected those sales at the time. They had seemed like individual misfortunes. Separate instances of the drought doing what droughts do to leveraged operations. They were not separate. He found Harriet in the crowd. She was watching the auctioneer. He moved to her side and spoke quietly. Meridian bought the Mercer land, he said. She did not look surprised. They bought the Hutchins ground too, he said, and the Pruitt place. She turned to look at him then. He said it plainly. We are in the middle of everything they own. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the Meridian representative walking back toward a dark SUV at the edge of the property. It was a different man than Gallagher, but the same shoes. I know, she said. Owen stared at her. How long have you known? She looked back at the field where the last pieces of Dale Mercer's farm were being numbered and tagged. Since the letter last October, she said. He understood then that she had not been protecting the farm from 2 red trucks on a flatbed. She had been protecting it from something much larger, and she had known it while he was still in a showroom, signing his name to things he did not fully understand, and she had not told him because the telling would not have reached him yet. He was angry for a moment. Then he was not angry, because the anger required him to argue with the decision she had been proven right about, and he could not do that. They drove home without speaking much. The auction signs on the fence posts passed outside the window, and Owen watched them go by. That evening, Harriet spread the county map on the kitchen table. Owen had brought it from the shelf without being asked. She put her finger on the Boone property and then on the parcels around it. Meridian's acquisitions formed an irregular ring, not complete yet, but progressing. 2 access roads to the north had changed hands. The main county route remained open, but the secondary roads that the farm used for hauling were 1 or 2 sales away from being controlled entirely by a company whose representative had come to the gate with polished shoes and a number that was supposed to sound large. The number had not been an offer. It had been an early move. Owen watched her trace the map. There is something else, she said. She went to the kitchen drawer and unlocked it with the small key she kept on her keyring and removed the plain envelope from October of the previous year. She placed it on the table and slid a second piece of paper out from behind the letter he had already read. He had not known there was a second piece. It was a photocopy of something official, a county document with a number and a date, and the heading, Crestfall County Land Use Regulatory Code, Section 14, Agricultural Continuity, Provision Adopted 1943. He read it. He read it again. If a registered agricultural parcel fails to demonstrate active cultivation for a period of 24 consecutive months, the county retains the right of review and may authorize transfer of use designation upon petition by an interested party. He looked up. They are trying to isolate us, he said. Cut off the roads and make it impossible to move product. Wait for the 24 months. She folded the map. Raymond knew this provision existed, she said. He made a note about it. She opened the tin box. Owen had not seen her open it since October. She went past the receipts, past the stack he had gone through at the gate, and lifted out the cloth at the bottom. The small envelope beneath it was tied with a strip of leather. She untied it without ceremony and laid 3 documents on the table. Owen picked up the first one, a receipt dated in the early 1950s, signed by 2 names. One of them, the Crestfall County Land Registry, acknowledging full satisfaction of all amounts owed on the Boone parcel at its current legal description. The second document was a letter from the state confirming certain permanent cultivation rights under an Agricultural Land Act specific to parcels registered before a certain point in county history. The third was a single page in Raymond Boone's handwriting. The date was 1975. The heading was simply a note about these papers. It explained what each document was, where it had come from, and how it should be used if anyone ever attempted to invoke the 1943 provision against the farm. Raymond had understood this threat 30 years before Preston Gallagher's polished shoes appeared at the gate. Owen sat with the note in his hands for a long time. His father had been a man he knew mostly through the shape of absence, through the things Harriet said, and the things she did not say, and the records in the tin box, and the way the farm ran. He was beginning to understand that the farm did not run the way it ran because of luck or stubbornness or a woman who refused to modernize. It ran the way it ran because two people had thought very carefully about every possible way it could fail and had prepared accordingly, and one of them had died before Owen was old enough to thank him for it. "Are these enough?" Owen said. "Against what Meridian is doing?" She was quiet for a moment. "I do not know yet," she said. "That is an honest answer." He set the note down on the table. "We need someone who knows the law," he said. She looked at him. "I am not talking about financing anything," he said. "I am talking about paying someone to read 3 pieces of paper and tell us what they mean in a courtroom." She did not answer immediately. He looked at the table. "I will sell the motorcycle," he said. "I own that outright. No one else has a claim on it." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted. Not softening exactly. More like the thing a person's face does when they recognize an argument made the right way. "All right," she said. Outside, the night had come down over the fields and the dry summer wind had gone still. Harriet put the documents back in the tin box and closed the lid and set it in the center of the table where they could both see it. Owen looked at the box. He had spent years looking at that truck in the corner of the barn and seeing only what it could not do. He was beginning to understand that the truck had never been the point. The tin box had always been the point, and everything Raymond had put inside it had been put there for exactly this. 2 weeks later, a white envelope arrived at the farm by certified mail. Harriet signed for it at the door. She brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen table with Owen standing across from her. The letterhead read, "Meridian Land Group Legal Division." The body of the letter notified Harriet Boone, registered owner of the parcel at Miller Road, Crestfall County, that Meridian Land Group intended to file a petition with the Crestfall County District Court, requesting a formal review of agricultural continuity compliance under the 1943 land use provision. The petition would cite road access limitations resulting from recent property transfers in the surrounding corridor. Hearing date 6 weeks from the date of notice. Harriet read the letter twice. She folded it and put it in the tin box on top of Raymond's note. Owen looked at her face. She did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a specific thing to arrive, and now it had arrived and the waiting was over, and that was in its own way a relief because waiting is its own kind of wait, and now at least they knew the exact shape of what they were carrying. 6 weeks is long enough to doubt everything and short enough that the doubting does not resolve. Harriet worked the farm the way she always worked it, which was the only answer she knew how to give to pressure. She was up before light every morning and in the fields or the outbuildings until the heat made the afternoon useless. And then she came in and sat at the kitchen table with the ledger and the county map and the 3 documents from the tin box laid out in front of her. She read Raymond's note so many times the fold lines went soft. Not because the words changed, because reading them was the closest thing she had to a conversation with the man who had written them. Owen sold the motorcycle on a Tuesday. He drove it to a farm 12 miles east where a man named Fletcher had been interested in it since spring, and he came home in Fletcher's truck and walked back to the barn and stood where the motorcycle had been, for a moment looking at the empty space on the concrete, and then he went to find Nathan Weaver's number in the phone book. Nathan Weaver was 30 years old and had been practicing in Lincoln for 4 years. He had grown up in a farming county 2 hours north of Crestfall, and he understood the language of land disputes without needing it translated. When Owen called him and described the situation, Weaver was quiet for a long moment, and then said he would drive down on Thursday. He arrived in a reliable sedan, not new with a briefcase that had seen real use. He shook Harriet's hand at the door and did not comment on the cement dust on her sleeve. He sat at the kitchen table, and she laid the 3 documents in front of him, and he read them, the way lawyers read things, slowly going back twice his face, giving nothing away. Then he read Raymond's note. He set it down and looked at the county map she had left on the table. He looked at the 3 documents again. "There is something you need to know before the hearing," he said. She waited. "Judge Keller has been on the Crestfall bench since before Meridian existed as a company," he said. "She does not like cases built on provisions that were designed for one purpose and are being used for another." He paused. "This provision was designed to keep land productive. What Meridian is doing with it is the opposite of that intent." Harriet looked at him. "Can we prove what they are doing?" Owen said from across the table. Weaver looked at the map. The pattern of purchases was visible, even without explanation. The ring was not complete, but the direction was clear. "I think the documents you have are sufficient to defeat the petition," he said. "But I want to check something first." He looked at Harriet. "Do you have any access to the county historical records, the land registry archives from the early 1950s? She thought about it. "The library keeps county records back to the territorial period," she said. "The land registry office has duplicates of some of them." Weaver nodded. "I want to look at the registry. Minutes from 1952, he said. "There may be something there that ends this before it begins." The following morning, Harriet drove to the county library with Cassie. Owen went to the land registry office separately. They had divided the records between them, without discussion, the way people divide work when they have been operating together long enough to know each other's efficiency. The library in Crestfall was a single-story building on the east end of Main Street that smelled of old paper and radiator heat. The county historical records were kept in a back room in filing cabinets organized by decade. The librarian, a woman named Mrs. Hollis, who had worked there for 30 years and knew the contents of those cabinets the way a farmer knows a field, unlocked the back room and told Harriet she was welcome to as much time as she needed. Harriet sat at the small table in the back room and began working through the 1952 files. Cassie took the adjacent cabinet. They worked in silence for an hour. Cassie found it. It was a bound ledger of county council minutes. The meetings of the Crestfall County Board of Supervisors from January through December of 1952. The November meeting minutes ran to 6 pages. Cassie read them and then read them again, and then carried the ledger to the table where Harriet was working and set it open in front of her without saying anything. Harriet read the relevant section. It documented a motion, a second, a discussion, and a unanimous vote. The Crestfall County Board of Supervisors, at its regular November 1952 meeting, had formally repealed the agricultural continuity provision of 1943 in its entirety, citing that the provision had served its post-war purpose and was no longer consistent with county land use policy. The repeal had been signed by the county clerk and entered into the official record. She read it a second time. The provision Meridian was using to build their case had not existed for 33 years. Cassie watched her read. When Harriet looked up, Cassie's expression was careful, the way young people look when they are trying not to assume they understand something correctly. "That means they have nothing," Cassie said. It was not quite a question. Harriet closed the ledger and held it in both hands. "It means they built their entire petition on a law that was repealed the same year Raymond paid off this land," she said. She sat with that for a moment. The back room of the county library was very quiet. Outside, a truck went past on Main Street, and the sound of it came through the wall faintly and then was gone. She was not a woman who believed in signs, but she noted the timing. Raymond had cleared the debt and received his clean title in 1952. The county had repealed the only legal mechanism that could have been used against the farm in 1952. Both things had happened in the same year, in the same small county, and the paper record of both had survived in tin boxes and filing cabinets, while the people who could have remembered them lived and died and were replaced by others who assumed the past was less relevant than the present. The past was more relevant than anyone had given it credit for. She thanked Mrs. Hollis and carried the ledger to the front desk and requested a certified photocopy of the November 1952 minutes, which Mrs. Hollis produced with the particular efficiency of a woman who took her archives seriously. That evening, Nathan Weaver sat at the kitchen table with the photocopy in front of him and the 3 documents from the tin box arranged beside it. Owen sat across from him. Harriet stood at the window, looking at the fields in the last light. Weaver read the council minutes carefully. Then he sat back and laced his fingers together on the table. "You do not need me," he said. Owen looked at him. "You can walk into that courtroom with this photocopy and those 3 documents, and you will win," Weaver said. "The petition has no legal foundation. The provision does not exist. It has not existed since Eisenhower was in his first term." He paused. "But I would like to be there," he said, "if you will allow it. Because I have been practicing for 4 years, and I have never seen a case where the defendant did this much of the work themselves." Harriet turned from the window. "You are welcome to come," she said. She said it the way she said most things without decoration. That night, after Weaver had driven back to Lincoln and Owen had gone to his room, Harriet sat alone in the kitchen. She opened the tin box and took out Raymond's note and unfolded it on the table in front of her. The handwriting was his, exactly the particular way he formed the letters with slightly more pressure on the downstroke, the way she had watched him write in ledgers for 23 years before he was gone. She had read this note perhaps 40 times in 6 weeks. But tonight she was reading it differently. Not for information, not to rehearse the argument. She was reading it because she wanted to be in the same room with it, the way people return to certain places, not because the place has changed, but because they need to remember what it felt like to stand there. Her hands were steady. That was true. But they were not entirely steady. Cassie came through the kitchen on her way to the mudroom and stopped in the doorway. She saw Harriet at the table with the note and the lamp on, and the rest of the house dark behind her. She stood there for a moment. She did not say anything. She went to her room. The next morning she told Owen quietly, while they were carrying water to the garden, that she had seen his mother reading the note alone in the kitchen at 11 at night, and that her hands had not been entirely steady. Owen stopped walking. He had never seen his mother show that kind of thing, and could not quite hold the image still in his mind. "She is not afraid," Cassie said. She was clear about that. She just misses him. Owen carried his water bucket the rest of the way to the garden and set it down and did not say anything for a while. The morning of the hearing came in cold and clear. a September sky, the color of stripped birch. Owen drove. Harriet sat in the passenger seat of the farm truck with the tin box on her lap and the certified copy of the 1952 council minutes in an envelope on top of it. She wore her good flannel shirt, the dark green one she kept for occasions that required it, and her boots were clean. Nathan Weaver met them on the courthouse steps. He shook Harriet's hand and nodded at Owen and held the door. The Crestfall County District Courtroom was a single large room with oak paneling that had been refinished sometime in the 1970s and had darkened unevenly since. The ceiling was high. The light came from windows on the south wall and from 2 rows of fluorescent fixtures that made everyone look slightly more tired than they were. Preston Gallagher was already seated at the petitioner's table with 3 men whose suits indicated they had driven up from Lincoln or possibly Omaha that morning. One of them had a document box open in front of him and was reviewing papers with the focused expression of a man who intends to speak for a long time. Gallagher himself was in the same navy suit he had worn to the gate in August. His shoes were clean again. He saw Harriet come in and looked at her for a moment, the way a chess player looks at the board when the opponent sits down calculating. She looked back at him without any particular expression and sat down. Dale Mercer came in through the side door and took a seat in the gallery. He was there because Nathan Weaver had called him and asked him to come, explaining that his direct experience with Meridian's acquisition approach could support an argument about the company's broader pattern of conduct in the county. Dale had agreed without hesitation. He had come in his work clothes, not his good ones, and he sat in the gallery with his hat in his hands. Cassie sat beside him. She had asked to come, and neither Harriet nor Owen had told her no. Judge Alma Keller entered at 9 o'clock, and the room stood. She was 67 years old, with white hair cut close, and glasses on a chain around her neck that she put on before she sat down. She had been on this bench for 22 years, and she had the settled, unimpressed quality of someone who has seen most of what a courtroom can produce and found the majority of it less surprising than the parties involved believed it to be. The petitioner's lead attorney opened his presentation with the standard language of land use compliance review. He cited the 1943 provision by number and section. He described the access road situation. He had maps which he submitted as exhibits showing the Boone parcel surrounded on 3 sides by properties now under Meridian's control. He was organized and thorough and spoke with the confidence of a man who had prepared for the specific opponent he expected to face. He had not prepared for the November 1952 council minutes. When he finished, Judge Keller looked at Harriet's table. Nathan Weaver stood and identified himself. He said that the respondent wished to address a threshold question before responding to the substance of the petition. He said the threshold question was whether the provision cited by the petitioner had any current legal standing in Crestfall County. He submitted the certified photocopy of the 1952 council minutes. He submitted the 3 documents from the tin box, each identified by date and origin. He stated simply that the agricultural continuity provision of 1943 had been repealed by unanimous vote of the Crestfall County Board of Supervisors in November of 1952, and that the repeal had been properly recorded in the official minutes and had never been rescinded or replaced. He stated that the petitioner's case rested entirely on a provision that had not been part of Crestfall County law for 33 years. He sat down. The courtroom was quiet, in the particular way a courtroom goes quiet when the architecture of an argument has been removed from underneath it. Judge Keller was already reading the photocopy. She read it slowly, the way she read everything. Then she looked at the petitioner's table over the top of her glasses. The lead attorney had turned to the man on his left and was speaking in a low voice. The man on his left was consulting the document box. Preston Gallagher was looking at the photocopy from across the room as though trying to read it from 30 feet away. Judge Keller set the photocopy down. "Mr. Gallagher's legal team will have a recess to review the respondent's submission," she said. She said it in a tone that suggested the review would not change her assessment, but that the process required it. The recess was 20 minutes. Owen sat with Harriet at the respondent's table. She had the tin box closed in front of her. She did not open it again. She had done what needed doing. When court resumed, the lead attorney stood and acknowledged that the 1952 council minutes appeared to reflect a valid repeal of the cited provision. He said his team would need time to research the procedural history before making further arguments. Judge Keller looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. "The provision has been repealed for 33 years, she said. "I think the procedural history is settled." She turned to the full room. "The petition brought by Meridian Land Group under the Agricultural Continuity Provision of 1943 is dismissed," she said. "The provision does not exist in current Crestfall County Code and has not existed since 1952. There is no basis for review." She set down her pen. "I am also directing the county assessor's office to review the pattern of property acquisitions in the Miller Road corridor over the past 24 months, she said. "If that review identifies conduct inconsistent with the state's agricultural land protection statutes, this court will take the matter up at that time." She looked directly at Preston Gallagher. "I want to be clear," she said. "This court is aware of what this corridor looks like on a map." Gallagher held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked down at the table. Court adjourned. The room stood and then began moving. Owen was on his feet. He looked at Harriet, who was still seated. Her hands on the tin box, looking at the front of the room where Judge Keller was gathering her papers, with the unhurried efficiency of a woman with other things to get to. Harriet stood slowly. Nathan Weaver was at her elbow. "That," he said quietly, "is the cleanest case I have ever seen decided." She picked up the tin box. "It was Raymond's case," she said. "I just carried it in." Outside on the courthouse steps, the September air was sharp and the sky was still clear. Owen stood beside Harriet in the sunlight and did not say anything for a moment, because there was too much to say and none of it was organized yet. Dale Mercer came through the door behind them and stopped on the steps. He looked older than he had at his own auction. He put his hat on and looked at Harriet. "I was wrong about a lot of things," he said. He did not qualify it or soften it, just said it. She looked at him. "You came when Nathan called," she said. "That was the right thing." He nodded. He put his hand out and she shook it. He walked down the steps and got in his truck and pulled out of the lot and drove away. Cassie stood at the base of the steps. She looked at her father's truck until it turned onto the county road and disappeared. Then she looked up at Owen and Harriet on the steps above her. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The expression on her face was the one that people wear when they have been watching something unfold for a long time and have finally seen it land correctly. They drove home on roads that looked the same as the roads they had driven in on. The fields were the same. The sky was the same. But Owen sat in the driver's seat differently than he had that morning. Something had settled in him during those 20 minutes of recess when he had sat beside his mother at the respondent's table and understood for the first time the full weight of what she had been carrying and how long she had been carrying it and how completely alone she had been in carrying it after Raymond died. He had thought the tin box was about trucks. He had thought the gate was about stubbornness. He had thought the whole long argument of the past year had been about the difference between his mother's way and the world's way. It was not about any of those things. It was about a man and a woman who had looked at a piece of land and decided to protect it, not just for themselves, but for whoever came after, and who had done the work quietly and without announcing it, and who had put the evidence in a tin box under a truck seat where it would outlast memory and outlast argument and outlast the kind of pressure that polished shoes and document boxes brought to county courtrooms. He drove past the Miller Road turnoff and corrected and turned in. The gate was visible at the end of the road. The iron rails caught the afternoon light the way they always did. He stopped the truck at the gate and got out and opened it and drove through and got out again to close it behind him. He stood at the gate for a moment with his hand on the latch. The fall wheat was showing in the near field, green against the dry September ground. The storage bins were full from the early harvest. The old Chevrolet sat in its corner of the barn, visible through the open door, patient, as it had always been. 6 weeks later, the Nebraska Attorney General's office opened a formal inquiry into Meridian Land Group's acquisition practices in 3 counties. The inquiry cited a pattern of targeted purchasing designed to isolate and pressure specific landholders. Preston Gallagher was placed on administrative leave pending the inquiry's completion. He did not return to Crestfall County. The investigation took 2 years. When it concluded, Meridian paid a settlement and divested several of the corridor properties at below acquisition prices. 2 of those properties were purchased by their original owners or their families. One of them was not the Mercer land. Dale had moved on, and the land had moved to a different family who would farm it differently and make their own decisions about what to borrow and what to hold. But the Boone property at the end of Miller Road did not change hands. It did not enter a review. It did not appear in any court document as a property under pressure. It simply remained. The fall passed into winter, and winter passed into the following year, and the year after that. Harriet did not slow down in the way that people expected her to slow down. She was up before light. She walked the fields every morning. She kept the ledger current and the tin box in its place under the seat of the old Chevrolet, which no longer ran but was not going anywhere. Owen took on more of the operation, not because Harriet could not manage it, but because that was what the farm required as it grew, and the farm was growing. Slowly, on its own terms, without signatures that put any part of it at risk. He married in 1989. His wife was a woman named June, who had grown up on a grain farm 40 miles west and understood the language of the place from the first time she walked through the gate. She and Harriet worked well together, which was not guaranteed, but was deeply necessary, and both of them understood that without discussing it. In the fall of 1989, Harriet drove to Anderson Farm Equipment in Crestfall. Owen went with her. Garrett Flynn was still there managing the floor, now his hair a little grayer, his handshake the same. He recognized Harriet the moment she walked in. Mrs. Boone. She shook his hand. "I am here to buy a truck," she said. He smiled the way he always smiled, reaching for the financing folders out of habit. She shook her head once. He stopped reaching. She opened the envelope she was carrying and placed a cashier's check on the counter. Flynn looked at the number on it. He looked at it a second time. "In the full amount," she said. He stood behind the counter for a moment. He had been selling farm equipment for over 20 years, and he had financed more trucks and tractors and combines than he could remember, and he had sold to widows and to young men overreaching their means and to operations that had grown carefully over decades, and he had never had a customer do this. "One truck," he said. "One truck," she said. "Paid for." Owen stood beside her. Flynn looked at him. Owen looked straight back. The truck arrived at the farm 2 days later. Harriet was at the gate when it came down Miller Road. She opened the gate and stood to the side and watched it roll through. Owen parked it in the yard and got out and stood looking at it in the morning light. It was a Ford F700, not red. She had chosen white, which did not show the field dust as badly, and which was not the color from the catalog page that had sat on her kitchen table in 1984. She had not said that was the reason. Owen understood it was. She walked around the truck once. She ran one hand along the hood, then she looked at Owen. "Nobody else owns any part of this," she said. He knew. He understood it differently now than he would have understood it 5 years ago. The words meant the same thing they had always meant, but the weight behind them had changed because he knew now what the alternative looked like from the inside. The old Chevrolet was still in the barn. It would stay there. Harriet had made that clear without being asked. Some things earned their place by what they had survived and not by what they could still do, and the Chevrolet had earned its place 10 times over by the time its engine gave out for the last time. Years passed. The farm continued in the way that working farms continue, which is not dramatically but persistently, each season building on the one before each decision, mattering, because decisions compound in the same direction as weather and soil and time. Owen became what Harriet had become, which was a person who understood the land, not as an asset to be leveraged, but as a thing that required a particular kind of faithfulness, and who ran it accordingly. He taught himself to read the sky before sunrise. He kept the ledger current. He walked the fields in the morning and wrote down what he saw without adjusting it for what he hoped. In the spring of 1994, his son Eli was born. Eli was a loud and energetic child who had his grandmother's eyes and his father's habit of asking questions that were harder than they appeared. By the time he was 4, he had the run of the farmyard and had strong opinions about the tractor and the barn cats and the particular mud in the low corner of the south field that was best for specific purposes his parents did not always endorse. One afternoon in the early spring of that year, Owen found Eli in the barn sitting in the driver's seat of the old Chevrolet. The boy had his hands on the cracked steering wheel and was making engine sounds with his mouth. Owen stood in the barn doorway and watched him. Eli looked up. "This truck is broken," Eli said. "It does not go." Owen came across the barn floor and leaned against the door of the truck. "That is true," he said. Eli looked at the wheel. "Why do we keep it if it does not go?" Owen opened the passenger door and got in and sat down on the patched canvas seat. The barn smelled the way it always smelled of old wood and oil and the particular dry dust of a place that has been worked in for a long time. He reached under the seat without looking and felt the corner of the tin box and pulled it out. Eli watched him open it. Owen sorted through the receipts until he found the one his mother had laid on top the day she showed him the total at the gate. It was worn at the fold, now soft from handling. He handed it to Eli. The boy looked at it with the serious expression of someone who cannot read, but understands that something is being communicated. "Let me tell you about this truck," Owen said. Eli settled back against the seat. "A long time ago, Owen said your grandmother stood in front of this truck and refused to move. Not because she was angry, not because she was afraid, because she had something in this box that was more powerful than any argument anyone was going to make to her, and she knew it, and she waited until the right moment to use it." Eli looked at the box in Owen's hands. "What was in it?" he asked. Owen looked down at the receipts, the ledger sheets, Raymond's note at the bottom refolded and worn and still readable. "The truth," Owen said. "Just the truth. Written down and kept." He handed the tin box to Eli. The boy took it with both hands, the way children take things they understand are being given carefully. Outside the barn, the new wheat was showing in the near field. The same field Harriet had walked every morning for 30 years, reading the season in the way the soil held its color and the way the early growth came up one row after another, each one a small continuation of something that had been started long before either of them, and that would continue long after. Harriet was in the field now. They could see her from the barn door, a figure moving at the edge of the planted rows with the particular steadiness of a person who has learned to walk ground they know completely. She did not hurry. She did not look back toward the barn. She was doing what she had always done. Owen sat in the old truck in the quiet barn and watched his mother work her fields and held the tin box between them and understood, without needing to say it, that what she had built was not a farm. It was proof. Proof that a person could hold a line through a drought in a courtroom, in the long pressure of money and time, and still be standing at the end of it. Proof that the things written down in ordinary handwriting and kept in ordinary places were sometimes the most powerful things in the world. Proof that the right answer to someone who tells you the timing is favorable is sometimes just to turn around and walk back to the work. The Crestfall County Record ran a brief item the following spring about the Meridian Inquiry's final resolution. Harriet read it at the kitchen table and folded the paper in half and set it down and finished her coffee. Owen asked if she wanted to keep it. She thought about it. "No," she said. "We have enough paper." She stood up and went out to the fields. The gate at the end of Miller Road stood as it always had, iron rails and chain latch, the paint gone from years of weather, the steel underneath still solid. People drove past it every day without giving it much thought. It was just a gate at the end of a farm road in Crestfall County, Nebraska, one of 1,000 like it. But the people who knew Harriet Boone knew what had happened at that gate. They knew about the flatbed and the 2 red trucks and the tin box, and the woman who had stood in the road and refused to move. They knew about the petition and the courtroom and the November 1952 council minutes found in a library filing cabinet by a 17-year-old girl who was looking for something she did not yet have a name for. Most of them thought it was a story about stubbornness. Some thought it was a story about luck finding the right paper at the right time. A few thought it was a story about a woman who was simply too proud to accept help when it was offered. None of those were wrong exactly, but none of them were the whole story either. The whole story was simpler than any of them. It was about a man named Raymond Boone who understood that the world would eventually come for the things you loved, and who spent his life writing down the evidence that what he loved was truly his, and who put that evidence in a tin box and left it where someone he trusted would find it. And it was about a woman who carried that box for 30 years and understood what was in it and waited for the moment it was needed. And it was about a boy who had to learn the hard way that the old truck was never the point. And it was about a gate that opened when things were earned and stayed closed when they were not, and that had never once opened for the wrong reason. That was all it was. That was everything it was.